Hi, pre-calculus students. Section 811, graphing sines and cosines. Back in chapter 2, we talked about graphing sines and cosines, the same equation we saw before. The only thing is the problems that you were given only ever had 2 or maybe 3 transformations going on at a time. And now we're going to throw all 4 into the mix. So as a reminder, this A, the absolute value of A really, is our amplitude. That's just our vertical stretch. Like how tall will it be? Okay, the B helps us to get our period. It is not our period. 2 pi over B is our period. That's the horizontal length it takes to complete one cycle of either the sine or the cosine. Okay, the H is the horizontal shift. And so if it says minus H, the H is actually a positive value. That's going to mean go to the right. And if this was addition, that would be like minus a negative, and it would mean go to the left. Right? And the K is our vertical shift. Now, when we deal with these as far as graphing, what we were doing before is we would start with our vertical shift, and that would give us our midline. Okay, then from there, we would think about what's our amplitude, how far up and down do I need to go from my midline? And then we'll deal with our period and our horizontal shift. So I've got a couple of examples here, and we'll go through all those steps. So first, I'm looking at this equation for part A. In the spot of the A is 3. So my amplitude is this, 3. And this is my B right here. Period is 2 pi divided by my B value. So my period is 2. My H, notice in the formula it says minus H, but this says plus 1. So my H is equal to -1. That's a horizontal shift of -1. And then this is my K. That's going to be a vertical shift of 2. Remember how I just said we would start with our vertical shift, and that would give us our midline. And so it's like my x-axis translated 2 down. There's my vertical shift. I'm going to assume a scale of 1 unless you indicate otherwise. So this would be -2. So I'm starting with that. My amplitude is 3. So from there, above and below 3, we drew these dashed lines in to kind of hold our graph in so we wouldn't exceed our maximum or go below our minimum. All right, and then we have a period of 2 and a horizontal shift of -1, and that can be kind of the trickier part. So what I like to do, and I'm not just saying this, this is what I usually do, is I'll do a little sketch off to the side of a cosine. The cosine parent graph is the one that starts at its maximum and then ends at a maximum. And if my period is 2, that means one cycle. I'm going to draw in like these 5 key points, my max, mins, and intercepts. If my period is 2, that means one cycle ends at 2. That means it's got to hit this min at 1, and then this has to be halfway between. So this is at 0.5, this is at 1.5. So sometimes it helps to sketch this, and here's my maximum. This would be my new midline, and this midline, and this would be my minimum. You have this off to the side, and then you can think, okay, now each of these 5 points has to shift 1 to the left. It can be helpful. Now my period is 2. I think I'm going to make my scale. So here's 1, here's 2. So one cycle has to happen in this little space. So I'm going to use this, and normally I would start here at my maximum. And on my scale right here, 2 spaces is equal to 1. So I'm going to have to go 2 spaces to the left. Okay, this was at 0.5 on the midline. So 0.5 on the midline would be here. And then I have to go 2 spaces to the left. Now, some people can keep all of that straight in their head all at one time. Sometimes it's just a lot. So this can help. At 1, I hit my minimum. So here's my minimum at 1. And then I have to go 2 spaces to the left. I hit my x-axis or my midline at 1.5. So here, but then I have to go 2 spaces to the left. And then I hit my maximum at 2, but I have to go 2 spaces to the left. And then once you have, remember, it often asks you for more than one cycle. Like once you have that, then I could just keep this pattern going, and then I could, whoops, off a little bit here. And you could draw it in, which is way easier to do. It's so bad. Way easier to do on paper than with this thing, which is being really bad right now. Something like that. Okay, that's one way to do it. I'm going to show you another way that sometimes people prefer. You do what works for you. Okay, so starting the exact same way with my midline and my vertical shift, but instead of like doing that period and transformation all at the same time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sketch on here what my graph would look like with just the period change, just a period of 2. And when I draw it in, I'm going to draw it with a dashed curve. So I'm just going to directly translate this onto here. So my maximum on the y-axis at half, I'm hitting my midline. At 1, I'm hitting my minimum. At 1.5, my midline. And at 2, my maximum. Now, this is only my period change. I have not shifted anything. So I'm going to draw this in as a dashed curve, just so I remember, okay, that's not my final product. And then what I'm going to do is each of these points, I'm going to translate 2 to the left. 2 because on my scale, 1 is 2 spaces. So this point here is going to go 2 to the left. This is going to go 2 to the left. This is going to go 2 to the left. So each of these is going to go 2 to the left, and then I can draw in my final graph, and then you could continue it to get more than one cycle. It's coming over too far there. Okay, so if it helps, just make sure it's very clear that this dashed line is not your final product. Maybe highlight or really darken in what your final product is. All right, so again, I did my vertical shift, I did my amplitude, then I'm thinking about my period, and then I finally, the last thing I think about is my horizontal shift. All right, so let's take a look at this one. If you're doing this at home, you might want to try it on your own first, and then if you're stuck, see what the answer is. Okay, my amplitude is from my A value, that's 2. All right, my period is 2 pi divided by my B value, which is 1/3. So 2 pi divided by 1/3 is the same as 2 pi times 3/1, which is 6 pi, so a period of 6 pi. And my H is pi over 2, so I have a horizontal shift of pi over 2. There's nothing being added on the end, so I have no K value. All right, so my midline is just staying the x-axis. I've got this amplitude of 2, so I'm going to sketch that in. And let's see, my period is 6 pi, so I think I'm just going to go like everything is just going 1 pi so that it will fit on here. And this was going by 1s. All right, now this is a sine, so just to keep in my head, what does a sine look like? A sine looks like this. This is ending at 6 pi, so that means it's hitting here at 3 pi, halfway, that would be 1.5 pi, and halfway between here and here would be 4.5 pi. I don't have the vertical shift to worry about. So really, I just need this, but then everything has to be shifted pi over 2 to the right. And on my scale, a half pi is a half of a space. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and go for it and just get my graph on here with the shift. So instead of starting at the origin, I have to go a half pi to the right. So that would be about there. And then instead of being at 1.5 pi, I have to go a half to the right. So that would be 2. I would hit my maximum. And then the x-intercept would not be at 3, it would be 3.5. So here's 3.5 would be here. Instead of being at 4.5, I have to go a half to the right. This would be 5 as my minimum. And then instead of at 6 pi, it would be at 6.5. Okay, so it's like every 1.5 spaces, something is going on. So I could, again, I could continue this going backwards here. Right, to get my 2 cycles. I know mine's really wobbly. Really wobbly. Okay, so there would be my sine. The other thing that you're sometimes asked to do is if you're given a graph or you're given you might be given some information like, hey, the horizontal shift is this, the amplitude is this, vertical shift is this, whatever, to write the equation. So when you do these, you can always, there are multiple ways to write everything. So you could always write it as a sine equation. So if you see this shape here, you could say, oh, I see a sine. You could have the opposite of a sine. So if you were to see a flipped shape like this. You could have a negative sign, you could see a cosine, and all of these are possible. Or you could see a flipped cosine. So you're gonna, whatever works for you. Now, I think the way the book wanted you to do this, I think they wanted you to see that the sign started here. So I'm gonna just start with that, but I'll show you there's more than one way. Okay, so I think what the book wanted you to think about was, like, oh, here is a sign right here. And look, it started here. There was a horizontal shift of pi over 2. My midline is through -3. That means k is -3. My amplitude, right, from here to here, from -3 up to -1, is 2. My period, the horizontal distance it takes to complete a cycle. So from here to here is a half pi, and then if I finished it, it would be a full pi. But in our equation, and we're thinking of this as a sine, right? That's a cycle of sine. We would be substituting into this. Okay, but the b value isn't the period. I have to think 2 pi over b equals pi. So what must have been here? So when I divide this, it equals pi. So b would equal 2. And once you've identified all of that, then you can say, okay, 2 times the sine of 2, and then x minus pi over 2, and then plus my k, or which was a negative, so -3. That would be one possible equation. Now I know I had some people in class that saw this, oh, look, that's a negative sign, right? It looks like this shape here. And so another thing we could do is we could say, oh, well, there's no shift. So if I see that, I would say that, let me do this, all of this goes together. So if we see it like this, those go together. Now, if we see it as a negative sign, we would say there is no h. The amplitude and the period, so a is still 2, vertical shift is still -3, period is still taking pi to complete one cycle. So b is still 2. It would just be, our equation would be y equals, because it's flipped sign, we would just see it as -2 times the sine of 2, and then you could write x minus 0, but x minus 0 is just x. You don't really need that. You could just write 2x. And then -3. Okay, so that's like all these would go together. That would be another way to see it. Okay, so that wraps us up with graphing sine and cosine functions. Have a great day.